Hey guys, this is NUSensei. Today I'll be going through an extension to the topic of using the bow as a melee weapon. I've done one for arrows, one for the bow, and there have been a few other videos from other YouTubers talking about the topic, notably Skallagrim and his discussion on historical bows and their practicality in hand-to-hand combat. Now, this is not really a response video to Skallagrim because I mostly agree with what he says.
No.
Rather, this is a general reply to the commentators on his video. I've been getting very similar comments in my videos, but of course Skallagrim has like 100 times the traffic, so a lot of the points that have been raised in his comment section have also been raised in mine, and I thought I'd take this chance to go through some of the general responses I have to people who are hypothesizing about how a bow could be used in melee combat. Firstly, I've noticed a trend between armchair commentators and people who have actually used the bow. For those who are archers, or at least have used bows, it goes without saying that we know that this thing is completely impractical for melee combat. Yet there are a few people who really insist that it could be in some way, and I've got a feeling that those people have never held a bow or really used one before. I don't want to discourage armchair commentating. I think there's some fun elements to it. It brings some good thought experiments, but I think it's generally agreed that the consensus amongst the experts, whether they're archers or historical fencers or so on, is that no, it's not realistically viable. But that aside, there are a few other things that I would like to approach or entertain, just to clarify, for the sake of the thought experiment, where I think some of the theories might not work. Firstly, a few people think that we might be exaggerating how weak and flimsy a bow can be. And the idea that an unstrung bow is basically a staff, that seems to imply that it can be used to cause damage. It could be breaking bones or causing a concussion or knocking someone out, and therefore, because it's like a stick, you can use it as a striking weapon and cause damage. I really want to insist that we are not exaggerating. Most bows are very light and flimsy. Now there are exceptions. Certain flat bows may be quite thick and could be used as clubs, but for the most part, bows are designed to be thin and light. Now, can you strike hard with a light weapon? Yes, but you have to do it a lot harder. It's more likely that you may break the bow on impact and cause any damage to your target. Some people are strongly playing the line where an unstrung bow could be used as a quarterstaff. A quarterstaff is going to be rounder, more balanced and heavier, so there's more heft in your movements. So you could viably use a blunt staff as a striking weapon. You could use it to thrust, and you can get quite a bit of force behind each movement. Even with minimal power, you can really feel the weight in each strike. There is a fairly substantial difference between this and this. Again, the weight, balance and thickness will vary between bow designs, but generally a bow stave is very, very light. You're not going to get the same amount of heft in each hit. You're not going to have the same amount of power in the thrust. You can still hit hard. Yes, it can probably hurt someone, but it might not cause much damage, if any. And seriously, if you are wearing any kind of armor, whether it's metal or just simply padded armor, it's going to absorb the entire blow. I mean, if someone struck you with this, you could probably do a basic forearm block and it would not break your arm. It's very hard to get significant force behind a blow from an unstrung bow stave because it's so light. Again, the lightness doesn't disqualify it as a weapon, but it isn't the same as a staff. We're not exaggerating. Bows are extremely flimsy, and this will break before it will cause damage. Yes, if you bash someone in the head hard enough, you can cause damage, but A human head is different to a ballistic gel replica on a table. Remember that a person who is being attacked is going to actively avoid being hit, and they will fight back. So when you're saying that a bow can be useful, you can hit someone and hurt someone, you've got to remember that the scenario will be an active defense, not simply someone allowing you to hit them. Speaking of staff weapons and bows, one thing which I had a question mark over, and I seem to be the only one mentioning this, is the curvature of the limbs while the bow is strung. I initially thought that having a curved limb makes it harder to strike with, because if you're holding it like this and the contact surface is this far back, that means you have to overswing to make contact. With a staff, it feels a lot more intuitive, because if I strike at my opponent, I'm going to strike where I think the end of the staff will be, and it will be at the strongest part of my movement. So if he's there, I'm going to strike that way, and I can immediately make contact, and it's coming at the strongest part of the stroke. So I can go, and that's a very solid hit. I can go from the side, I can go from the other side, and at each point, the staff is where I think it should be, so it's easy to make contact. So if I were to swing a bow like I would a staff, using the same motion, the same point of contact, I would end up there. That's my staff motion, and I'm not making contact. To make contact, I need to go a bit further. It doesn't seem like much, but this is what I mean by it's not an intuitive weapon, because you have to come to that spot and then a bit more. Whereas if you're using a straight weapon, you know it will hit here. If you're using a curved weapon, which is curving towards the opponent, it should make contact a lot sooner. And that is still an effective weapon. So if I'm using the bow this way, I could use it a lot more intuitively. That makes sense. But using it this way, I have to compensate for that extra distance. And that might mean a miss. That might mean I'm striking with less power. I've never seen someone else point this out, so I might just be hypothesizing the wrong direction, but I do think the fact that if you're using a recurve bow, this is going to be less effective. And again, if talking about modern examples like Green Arrow, where they're kind of striking like this or swinging around like this way, I feel that the angles conceal the fact that you have a slightly more distance between you and your opponent. It's a more awkward swing, so it can be done, but I find that using a straight weapon would probably be more effective in this situation. Some commentators have hypothesized that perhaps you can use the limb and the string to hook an opponent. I'm not sure exactly which part. Maybe the limb tip, you could possibly hook someone and pull them off perhaps. I don't know, that's really pushing it. The curve isn't that much. You could snag someone, but for me, I'm holding a stationary target. I could, but that's with no resistance. So I don't think the limb tip itself is going to be a particularly good hooking item. The second thing is whether I can catch a weapon or catch a limb and use it to control the opponent's weapon. Well, again, this is a very strange hypothetical. Here I've got a weapon sticking out at me. Could I catch it? Oh yeah, I could. That's quite a push. I mean, you've got a very big gap here, but a very thin gap up here, and to control it, you have to really catch it towards the end. And again, the placement of the string and the limb curvature, you think you're swinging towards it, but you're actually a bit off. So it's harder than it looks. It's like threading a needle by swinging the needle towards the thread. That's really tough. And this is a moving target, then it's going to be nearly impossible. You really have to time it really well, and it takes a bit of luck. I get the stationary example. I mean, I could do it, but then what? I could perhaps, pull it, maybe twist it, and then that would happen. So, no, it's not a very good idea. And if you're using a bladed weapon, then that's going to cut the string. If you're using a strung weapon, the string's going to come off. So, no, you can't viably use this as a way to control a weapon. You can't use it to control joints. that's exactly what happens. In this case, the string simply came off the limb tip. I can just restring it, I can push, pull, and put it back on. But that's a perfect example of why it can't work. You've got to remember the string is not what you think it is. It is not a solid wire which you can use to choke someone or grab someone and throw them away. It doesn't work that way. Another thing that commentators overlook is whether you're talking about an unstrung bow or a strung bow. This is a very big difference because a lot of people are imagining this is a viable weapon. And again, if you leave the bow unstrung, it's a stick. So anything you do with a stick is going to be equally as effective with an unstrung bow. And yeah, you can wave it around. Yes, it's a very low profile, it doesn't really get in the way. But in battle, your bow is not like this. Your bow is like this. So this is a much different thing to work with. Here you've got zero cross section. It's a stick, you can control it really easily. Here you've got a shape that is like this. This is the space you are working with. And you cannot use the interior space because the string's in the way. And you're basically holding this thing. If you're using it as an offhand weapon, you're not holding it like this where you've got a convenient parrying weapon, or you have something on your side here which you can hold and keep out of the way. But instead you're hugging this almost oblong rectangular object against you, and this string is going to interfere with everything you do. This string is going to snag against any belt or scabbard you're wearing. When you move it across, it will snag across your face. This thing is clumsy. When I say a bow is clumsy as an offhand weapon, it's the string that causes it. Not the empty bow stave, but the string. One of the things I said in my comments was that I feel more comfortable with a single sword rather than a bow and sword. Now, I don't legally have a sword, so I'm using the deadly bow and lightsaber combination. There's a response video from Jim Giant who pointed out that yes, you could have your bow stave in your offhand and keep it out of the way while you still have full control over your blade. And yeah, that makes sense. He in fact demonstrated some effective techniques where you could, if someone's attacking your head, you would step backwards, parry the blow, bring it down, and then thrust from underneath. That's a pretty skillful technique, and yes, if this was a bladed weapon, you could hypothetically strike and do some damage. And this makes sense. If you're talking about a bow in your offhand, then yes, this is as effective as any other stick or long object, whether it's a branch, a broken axe haft, or even an oaken shield. Again, when you have the bow strung, you have this problem of this space being unusable. So when you hold it off to the side, it's awkwardly pinned against your shoulder or your armpit, and it's here. Could you do it? Yes. It kind of sticks out in front of you, so it's kind of a little awkward because the bow is kind of there. So if depending on the size of the bow, this could be a problem. But more importantly, I don't think this can be used in combination with a lot of techniques. Firstly, if you're going to parry with this by kind of moving upwards or knocking on the lower side, the curvature of the limbs will make it very risky for your hand, because if a blow strikes you here, then it might glance down and hit your hand down here. That is just asking for your fingers to be chopped off. I do not think that the bow, when strung, works as effectively. If this was a straight weapon, then yeah, you might knock it away and it's fine. But here, it's either going to glance upwards and towards your head if you're pointing the wrong way, it's knocked backwards, or it's going to go down and strike your hand. Now again, I'm just hypothesizing here because I doubt this has been done in history. I'm not the most experienced swordsman, so you can correct me here, but I think that this is a very bad idea. There's no hand protection, and the blow will naturally come across towards your hand, and there's no guard, so that's going to really be a bad idea. So revisiting that previous technique, if I were to defend from someone attack from this side, and I would step back, parry the blow, and then come down and thrust, I've got a problem. If I do that, the string is pinning my arm against my body. I can't move and thrust anymore. Before I could do so, I could come down, thrust forward like this. But with this technique, when I'm parrying, holding in place, the string's in the way. If the string isn't pinning my arm and I'm holding it further forward, it's going up against my hand. If I'm using a weapon with a cross guard, that will also snag against the string. And of course, if I'm using a bladed weapon, that will cut the string. So this one piece of thread is stopping me from executing my full range of motion, so I can't use it like this. Could I adapt this so that I could use a defensive technique at the same time? Possibly, but I really don't think this is going to be a viable offhand weapon. I think that if this is not going to be useful in hand-to-hand, it's better to simply discard or throw it at the opponent and then switch to your main weapon. In this case, I do think that having nothing is better than having a strung bow. And this is another concept which a lot of people seem to disagree with. The idea that it's better than nothing. I think that a strung bow is worse than a stick. A stick is a better offhand option. It might be, again, a broken handle. It could be a chopstick. That could be better as an offhand tool than a bow that is strung. Again, the bow stave that is unstrung is a stick. I don't consider that to be a viable point of discussion because it's a stick now, and there's no point discussing it as a bow because you're not using it as a bow. But if you have the bow strung the way it's meant to in battle, then I think it's much better to drop that and rely on something else, whether it's your primary weapon for defense and offense, or using your spare hand to grapple, or find something else to use rather than your bow. I think some people do underestimate the utility of an empty hand. A lot of fighting styles do only use one hand. Now, if you have the ability to use a secondary tool like a buckler or a dagger or a cloak, then great, that's something which you can incorporate into your fighting style. But a bow that is strung, I don't think that is useful. You're basically hugging an extra tool which provides no advantage in a fight. So if it provides no advantage, why have it? That's my opinion. Something else which hampers discussion is the exact scenario you have in your mind. When I think of bows in self-defense or in a melee situation, I think of certain scenarios, but then other people might think of historical situations or ambush situations or battle scenarios, and because this isn't communicated, what I hypothesize doesn't match within your mind. One thing I've seen often is the scenario where somebody is suddenly running towards you and you have to use your bow in self-defense. Now, when I think of that, I think, someone suddenly running towards me. How far is this person? Because if someone's running towards me, I'd imagine they're more than a few paces away, which means if they're running towards me, I can shoot them. That's what a bow is meant to do, right? If there's any distance between me and my enemy, I can shoot that person. That's what an archer is meant to do. So I find it hard to imagine a situation where somebody is running towards me and I can't see them coming. If I'm completely oblivious and they're suddenly running towards me and they're right here, I think I've got more troubles than trying to use a bow in self-defense. I think, honestly, again, this is such a last-ditch scenario that is so extreme that you're almost forcing the person to do this. I believe that if this is your scenario, the faster you get to your secondary, the better your odds for survival, whether you're just reaching straight away. And if you have your bow, yes, you could discard it and switch to secondary, or you can throw it at them and then switch to your secondary. But if you're attempting to use this in any capacity in melee, whether you're striking or you're thrusting and then switching, the more time you try to use this as a weapon, the lower your odds of survival, because this is an ineffective weapon. It is worse than an empty hand. Again, some people will say that, if it's ineffective, you've got to make up for it in an effective way. I think that if you have a secondary weapon like a sword or a maul or a mallet, even a dagger, then you can just pull it out and just fight back. That shouldn't be that hard in this situation. That there really isn't a circumstance where you really have to choose between this or this. Either you see them coming from a kilometer away and you shoot them, or you like wait till they come towards you, then you calmly put your bow down and then pick up your weapon and fight. That's not something which really is a realistic situation. You're really forcing this to happen as, you know, you must use your bow or else you die. That to me is you're artificially putting limitations and you're not really explaining or exploring why this could be used or how this could be used. If I really had to use the bow because you told me to and you forced me to, then I think raw aggression will win the day rather than technique. I don't think it's going to be about striking or thrusting. I think in the end, if you have to fight at this distance, you're either going to do whatever you can to get the heck away, or you're going to close even closer and minimize their movements and push this against them. Especially with a modern bow. The modern bows have to wait closer to the riser in the middle of the bow, and especially compound bows, because a lot of people ask about compound bows. Those are quite heavy, especially if they're middle bows. So in that case, you probably want to push it against their face, try to bash them with the bow rather than swinging. The swinging, that may or may not work. It's very fancy. I don't think it's an effective way of thinking. But the most powerful part of the bow is not the limb, but the middle. So if that's the case, you can probably smash someone with the bow, put in the face, and then get the heck away. To draw this together, I think the hypotheses of using a bow in melee fall into one of two categories. The first category is, can you adapt a fighting style to match archery equipment? And that might mean, could you adapt sword fighting or star fighting techniques to make this work, or could you use an arrow as a rapier, that sort of thing. And if you're going to put it that way, then yes, you can. You could apply the fundamentals of center line control while using a chopstick or using an arrow, and that could in some ways work. And you might argue that the sign of a true master is to be able to turn anything into a weapon. So if you train in a particular discipline and you cross over and apply them using a different tool, then yeah, that should be viable in some way. Could you turn an ineffective weapon into an effective weapon with enough training and practice? You probably could. I mean, if I could spend the next 20 years making a fighting style using a strung bow, I could probably come up with something which looks at least aesthetically pleasing, if not effective. But that's not the case when we talk about whether it is used as a melee weapon. If you're adapting something, a style, or creating a style, then yeah, but that hasn't been done yet. So that's why I kind of dismiss that line of argument. So if you're bringing something like that, then you are trying to make a bad melee weapon into a decent one, but you're putting a lot of a big stretch into making it work. The second category is whether you can modify the bow to make it more viable. And again, if you're going that far, you're going beyond the definition of a bow. Now, there are some examples. There are historical examples from the Native American Indians and even Japan, where you stick spearheads at the end of your bow. And then you have the complete fantasy ones where, look, here's a bow. What if I add an arm shield or a hand shield, and then some metal guards, and maybe a hook and a spike and a blade in the front? Look, if you reach that point, it's just pure fantasy now. Yeah, if you add things to that extent, then yeah, it's a weapon now. You're no longer using a bow. You're using a sword bow or a spear bow, and that's completely different. My argument is that the more things you add to the bow, the less effective it is as a bow. I mean, it's kind of like thinking, gee, I have a lantern. What if I add a shield on the lantern and then add a hook and a blade, 2 blades, and a pommel launcher? If you're modifying the original source that much, it no longer is the original weapon. So, in our discussion, a bow's a bow. It's not a bow slash dagger sword, Swiss Army knife combination. This is what I'm talking about. If you're modified, yes, of course, you can stick a shield on here and then make it a super defensive weapon. But it probably wouldn't be very good in its original purpose. So, yeah, I think that it's kind of fun to hypothesize in that case, but if you're making this extended argument about modifying a bow, then I think we've lost the direction of that discussion. Anyway, that's my response to the responses. And look, I'm not taking this too seriously. It's a bit of fun doing this. It's a thought experiment. People are just having fun sitting back and saying, what if we do this? And you know what? Some of these things are really silly. But if you are thinking that this could seriously be used as a weapon, I'm going to repeat what Skallagrim said. No. Apart from that, feel free to post your thoughts below. This is NUSensei. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.